So I have a confession to make. In my entire life as a reader, I have only reread a handful of books of the thousands that I've read. I'm always kind of chasing that next story or looking for that new world to explore. I never go back and revisit some of my favorites. And I was watching Mike's book reviews last week, and he did a great video about books that he loves rereading and books that he would consider rereading again, and it inspired me. I thought about what are 10 books that I've read before that I wouldn't mind re-exploring again. And so that's what I did. I made a list for you guys today. And if you are curious at all about what kind of stories I might personally revisit and be tempted to break my own I don't reread rule, stick around. So let's start today talking about a couple of series that I have read more than once. One of them is The Kingkiller Chronicles by Pat Rothfuss, and I read those books when they came out in physical. I sight read them, and then I started to hear a few years ago that there were rumblings that Doors of Stone was about to release, book 3 in this never-ending trilogy, apparently. So since I couldn't really remember the events of books 1 and 2, I went and got the audio books and listened to them both all over again. Well, clearly, obviously, the joke was on me because that book is still not out, and I don't think it ever will be. Maybe it will, who cares? Anyway, Kingkiller Chronicles, I've reread it. What's the other one? Oh, Skin Game by Jim Butcher. I've read that 3 times, and I did it all on audio. I don't know why. I've not reread any of the other Harry Dresden books in the Dresden Files, but just something about Skin Game for me totally worked because I love a great fantasy heist story, and that's exactly what Skin Game is. Off the top of my head, that's about all I can remember rereading. So let's get into this list, and you know what? I'm not going to use any of the books or series that Mike used in his video. There were a handful that I agree with him on, but this is an entirely new list. I'm going to start with the ones that I don't have physical copies with me here, and God, that sounded like Christopher Walken. I'm going to start with the books that I don't have physical copies here, and I'll show you a graphic right over here. Then we're going to get into the ones that I actually own in physical. All right, so book number 1, or maybe series number 1, but for sure book number 1 that I'm interested in rereading is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. I remember reading this book and being just enamored with the world building of Camorra, this really cool Venetian style setting. I really loved the bromance that we got between Locke and Jean. I loved the backstories. I'm one of the people that actually love those flashback scenes. So when I think about books that I don't remember all the details of, but I know I love the story, The Lies of Locke Lamora is absolutely right up there. I know it got a broken binding treatment. I know that there's all kinds of special editions about it. I know that I don't have it in physical, so maybe that'll be the first book that I pick up in a reread. We'll see. Scott Lynch, I might be coming back to you. All right, let's move on. And of course, I should say, I'm obligated to say, please do like the video. And if you want to hang out with me a little bit more, think about hitting that subscribe button if you like curated lists of books to check out. All right, the next one on the list. I know this is not going to be a big favorite of anybody's, but for those who love it, you'll understand why I am interested in rereading The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. I've only read this book the one time, and yes, you've heard it probably a million times before. This is a series that improves upon each reread because you pick up more of the things that you just missed entirely through books 1 and through 4. I'm interested in this. Now, I have to say, the main character, Severian, he's not a character favorite of mine. In fact, the story itself is not a favorite of mine. I think what it is for me is that I can recognize the brilliance that is Gene Wolfe and how he's able to basically disguise fantasy as science fiction and as science fiction as fantasy, and we're not entirely sure what we're looking at the first time through. I think with a second set of eyes as I reread something like that, knowing quite a bit more about the world, I'd be more likely to pick up things that I missed around the first go around and give me an even bigger appreciation, if that's possible, for author Gene Wolfe. Book of the New Sun. Now, this is a series that is absolutely not for everybody. I know people that are currently reading it that are not having a very good time with it. But again, just for pure artistry of it, I think I would like to check it out. Possibly just book one, Shadow of the Torturer. It's only maybe 250, 300 pages. Not that difficult to get to. Maybe we'll do that one. All right, what's up next? Next up is urban fantasy, and I love this series. It's a completed series. I know I've had a lot of viewers find this series through BellTube. And oh yeah, by the way, I'm Brian. Welcome to BellTube. I'm horrible about ever introducing myself. Anyway, let's talk about Alex Verus series by Benedict Jacka. This is a series that, was sort of inspired by the Dresden Files. It's set in London, but the protagonist, Alex Verus, I find more compelling than Harry Dresden. I don't know really why. I think I'm drawn to how our main character, Alex Verus, was raised as a mage in Europe, very differently than Harry Dresden was. And it gives us a main character that is kind of not really good and he's not really bad. He's kind of somewhere in the middle. He doesn't want to be bothered all that much, and you don't know what side of the line he's going to fall on any given day, good, bad, or otherwise. And I just found that to be a really compelling story. I also really liked the fact that it's a tight cast. There are a handful of antagonists, there are a handful of side characters, and I believe there's either 10 or 12 books in the series, but we fully explore almost all of them. And so, yeah, Alex Verus, I could absolutely see myself rereading it. Maybe I'll take a look at those on audio, because I sight read all of those on my Kindle, and I'm feeling a bit of an urban fantasy, kind of longing. Although I do know that, the new Dresden Files is coming out, I think, at the end of the year. So maybe that'll satisfy the itch, maybe not. Maybe we'll go back to Alex Verus. Next up. Now, this is a series that I have said the last 2 years when I've done my number one, top 10 fantasy series of all time list, this has come in at number one both times, and that's Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings. This is 16 books. I've read them. I've only had a book hangover 2 times in my life. And what do I mean by that? A book hangover for me is when I read the final sentence of a book, I put the book down, and I say to myself, maybe even subconsciously, I don't think I can read anything for a little while because that was so good. Anything else is going to pale by comparison. That happened to me with The Dark Tower by Stephen King, and it happened to me with Assassin's Fate, which is the final book in Realm of the Elderlings. Now, would I reread 16 books? If I didn't have a BookTube channel, there's a pretty good chance that I would, because I know I absolutely love that story. And for me, Realm of the Elderlings, I read it kind of as they came out, and specifically, I don't really ever take notes when I read a book. I just don't. It's pure enjoyment. It seems like homework if I'm ever kind of taking notes or whatever. But I did for Realm of the Elderlings, and there were some certain quotes in there that were so timely for me with what I had going on in both my personal and my professional life that I wanted to remember them forever. And that no other series has really done that to me before, where I said, oh my God, I got to grab a pen and write this down so I never forget it. And that happened a bunch of times in Realm of the Elderlings. So this is a huge series. They're really long books. I cannot promise that I would ever reread all 16 books while I have the channel, but I am tempted because Fitz Chivalry Farseer is one of my all-time favorite main characters ever. Yes, he makes terrible decisions. It's okay. So do all of us. He is kind of the everyman of fantasy sometimes. And there's just something about Robin Hobb's writing when it comes to basically, the person itself that she's writing, the characteristics. Also, the dialogue, she is called the Queen of Fantasy in many, cases for a big reason. There can be people just sitting around a fire having a discussion, and it's more interesting to me than a great big battle going on in another fantasy series. So, Realm of the Elderlings, my number one fantasy series so far. By the way, that might be getting knocked off its perch this year. We'll talk about that more as we get into the later half of the year. But yeah, Realm of the Elderlings, Robin Hobb, that is a series I would very potentially revisit. All right, what's next? This one is not a fantasy. This is science fiction, and I read this a long time ago when it came out, and I remember next to nothing about this other than it was kind of a precursor to the internet, and I am talking about Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. This book came out in 1992, and I was a young, probably just recently graduated college student or about to graduate college, and the ideas that kind of fomented in my mind reading something like Snow Crash, I just remember thinking, this is so futuristic and this is so cool. And I think if I'm not mistaken, the main character's name is Hero Protagonist. I think that's what it is. I don't remember anything else about this book besides that. But I know that in science fiction, I tend to remember more of the details than I do in fantasy. I don't know why, except for Snow Crash. So that is definitely an option. Maybe I would do it on audio. That seems like maybe a good way to go about it. If you've read Snow Crash before and you are, of an opinion one way or the other, like, hey, Brian, it's amazing, you should reread it, throw that in the comments. By the way, if you like any of these books, throw them in the comments. Or if you have warnings for me going, hey, you know what, man, that was really good in the early 90s, but it doesn't hold up anymore, leave that in the comments too, because you might end up saving me some time and you might actually reaffirm why I don't reread books if they don't hold up. All right, let's talk about some physical books that I have, and this is the oldest book that I have on the list that I read, and I probably read this when I was about, I'm gonna guess 13, maybe 14 years old. This is On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony on the Incarnations of Immortality series, is book 1 of 7. They're very short books, but this book did something for me that just absolutely exploded my interest in fantasy. I was reading Piers Anthony, and I was reading the Dragonlance series by Tracy Hickman and Margaret Reese, I think is her name? Weiss, that's her name. Anyway, Dragonlance and this, for me, were really my entry points into fantasy, and there was just something so cool about this book that this incarnation of death is actually a human being that has to become death and serve as the role of death. I thought that was so cool. Then again, I was only 13 or 14. This might not hold up at all. I know a ton of Piers Anthony stuff does not hold up, and you don't need to Google him. I'll be the first to tell you there's problems with Piers Anthony. But this really got me interested. And the back says, the blurb is, the man who murdered death. That's pretty awesome. I hadn't read anything like that, nor have I read anything like it since, where a person actually goes out and murders the incarnation of death. I kind of want to remember what this is about, so this is on the potential reread list. Let's move on to another series which is becoming all of a sudden a booktube darling out of nowhere, because I read these when they came out. How do you know? Because I've got both the paperbacks, and yes, I know I'm showing you the back sides, because the front sides are Raymond E. Feist, Magician Apprentice, Raymond E. Feist, Magician Master. They sell it now as just Magician, but back in my day, they did it as 2 books. I've got the original paperbacks that I read. I loved this series, and I was sharing with a friend the other night that when I was going through my books, when I started this channel, I was actually getting my books out of storage and looking at the amount of Raymond E. Feist books in this world that I have read, I was knocked off my seat, because it's something like 18 or 19 books of these that I've read in his Rift War series, and I loved every one of them. I anticipated them showing up at the bookstore, and I was buying them on day one. And now, since the Broken Binding has done such an unbelievable treatment of Magician, and if you haven't seen that yet, it is such a beautiful cover. It might be my favorite cover that I've seen this year, for sure, that they've done. But all of a sudden, Raymond E. Feist is, kind of coming back in my life. And, if you've watched this channel much, I'm a huge Janny Wirtz fan, and she collabed with him on the Daughter of the Empire trilogy. I've read that as well, but this is really where it all started with the Magician books. So this is absolutely something I would put in consideration of going back and rereading, because a lot of you booktubers are going to be reading it, I think, for the first time. Let's keep going. We talked about urban fantasy before. We talked about my second favorite series, or maybe my third favorite series in Alex Verus. This is my first favorite series, but I don't know if it holds up. I have to go back and take a look. I happen to have the last book in the series right here called King Bullet, but of course we are talking about Richard Kadri's Sandman Slim series. All right, since the day the channel started, I've been screaming from the rooftops about Sandman Slim. This is, the monster who kills monsters. This is the devil's hitman who gets sent to hell from his friends doing a magical ritual, and his basically motivation is he becomes the first person to ever escape from hell, and he wants to find his revenge on the people that sent him there in the first place. I love Sandman Slim. I just think Richard Kadri is just such a cool dude, and I've been following him on socials for a long time. He helped me digitally edit a photo I took in my nightclub a long time ago. He's just an outstanding individual, and I get the feeling, I think the rumors are swirling, that the final book, King Bullet, may not be the final Sandman Slim book. In fact, I think he's writing a new one, which is really, really exciting, but I wouldn't mind going back and revisiting Sandman Slim. Maybe it would be something that I do on audio. I know, as I mentioned before, Mike from Mike's Book Reviews has Sandman Slim on his urban fantasy to-do list, or to-read list. I think we call that a TBR in the business, Brian. I'll edit that out. Anyway, maybe when he's doing Sandman Slim, I'll listen to it again. That would be something that I would love to revisit. I love Stark, the main character, the monster who kills monsters. All right, let's talk about a chonker of a book. Let's talk about an atmospheric author that I think is probably the best at writing atmosphere of any author I've ever read. And that is really high praise, because I've read a lot of books, but I don't think anybody gets atmospheric world building quite as good. And there's no cover here to see this book, but it is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Now, Piranesi, one of my favorite books of all time. Would I reread it? Sure, to kind of get the atmosphere of it a bit, but Piranesi's a mystery, and once you've read it, it's a little bit like Book of the New Sun insofar as you're not wondering what's going on as much, because you already know what's going on, and that is really the fun, for me at least, of Piranesi. I barely remember anything significant out of this thing. I read it when it came out. This was many, many years ago. I saw the adaptation on, I don't remember which network had it, but I liked it. It was good. But I tell you what, Susanna Clarke is such a gifted author that I would enjoy my time on every page with this, because of the fact that I just love her writing style. And I know the story is long, and I know that there's ups and downs and lulls and high points, just like any big story like this. But yeah, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I am leaning into the microphone. It just fell off the table. I don't know. We'll Durfee that out later. Let's talk about number 10, and then I'm going to give you one for the road. Number 10 is not fantasy. It's not science fiction. It's historical fiction. It is set in the 1600s in feudal Japan. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The Anjin-san, Shogun. I just read this last year. This was my book of the year last year. And you may be asking yourself, Brian, maybe you're asking me, Brian, why in the world would you read a 1,300-page book when you just read it a year ago? Because it's that good. James Clavell's masterpiece, in my opinion, Shogun. I want to thank Alan from the Library of Alexandria, by the way, who actually sent me this physical copy. I enjoyed my time in Shogun immensely. So the reason why I read this is because, the adaptation was coming out last year on TV. I wanted to read it. I thought, man, this thing comes in like 6 parts within the book. And I'll do it kind of like some other channels were doing, where they would read like books 1 and 2, and then, wait a few weeks and do books 3 and book 4, wait a month, do books 5 and book 6, all within these 1,300 pages. It was so great to me, I could not put this book down. I basically Wheel of Timed it, and if you're new to the channel, in 2021, I read The Wheel of Time over a period of about 3.5 months, straight through. Nothing else, just the entire Wheel of Time stuff that's back there. I had to do the same thing with Shogun because it was that good, and I could not put the details of this back into the reserves of my mind whilst I went out and explored a fantasy world or a science fiction world and forgot what was happening to the Anjin-san and Lord Toranaga and some of my favorite characters there. So yeah, Shogun, would I reread it? Absolutely. This is something I would do with sight reading. I don't know how well it translates to audio because there is Japanese in here, and I actually can read Japanese a little bit, so I kind of would do this, I think, more in a sight reading manner. That's going to get me to the one for the road today. And by the way, I should say thank you to the patrons of this channel. I didn't mention them earlier, and sometimes I do forget. It's kind of a weird thing sometimes when you talk about Patreon, because where do you show the card? You do it at the beginning when everybody's watching and most people kind of care, don't care, or at the very end when most people have already clicked off by then. So I'm going to try to make it a point to put the Patreon, list a little bit earlier in the videos moving forward, but here's this for now. And in the meantime, let's do a quick one for the road. And we're going to talk about revisiting old favorites. This is a lesson that I'm learning from you guys. So normally in these one for the roads, it's kind of my thoughts to you to help, improve your day a little bit. I'm going to use this one as kind of a thank you to you guys, both to Mike for creating the video in the first place, but also to all the Belltude community viewers that recommend books to me that I've read before, but it's been so long, they know that I would love to revisit those worlds. And I love the idea of revisiting just a few of the old favorites, not rereading my entire catalog. There's so many series out there and books out there that I am just dying to get to. And I know if I went and read all these 10 books, that would put all of the new stuff on my TBR out another year or two further than they need to be. But there are a handful of books, especially in these 10 that I just listed here, that I'm very grateful for you guys to telling me, hey, you ought to revisit a few of these favorites, because you know what? I do that sometimes with movies. If I'm flipping through TV and I see one of my old favorite movies, I'll let it just land there, and it becomes almost like comfort food. Same with music, right? I'm not the best at listening to the newest and the latest and the greatest music. I think mostly because I listen to really old classic rock, and to me, that is the pinnacle of, what I personally like. But when I think about it, I don't go out finding new bands that play that kind of music. I revisit my favorites over and over and over again, and it makes my life that sometimes gets kind of tumultuous, like I know a lot of yours do. It makes my life a little bit more comfortable when there's something kind of steady that I can rely on. And I'm like that with music. I'm not like that with books. And I want to thank you guys for pointing out that there might be some opportunities in my already read catalog. What do we call that? The ARK? The already read catalog. I think I just coined a new phrase. In my ARK. All right. Yeah, I think someone's used that already. Anyway, I've gone on a really long time. Thank you guys for helping me revisit some of these. I'd love to know in the comments, what are some of your favorite books to reread? Or if any of the ones that I've read here, or that I've listed here, can you let me know if they hold up still, or if you think maybe it'd be a journey you'd like to take with me if I go back and reread these? Maybe you haven't read them yet before. Is that something we could do together? Let me know in the comments. As always, you guys, stay positive. And of course, here's your fortune.